Today, I'm going to be talking about film grain, specifically Cinegrain. Cinegrain is one of the many choices out there you have for using grain in your footage, and specifically, it's the film grain that I've been using. So I figured I'd make a video where I just kind of talk about what exactly film grain is, how I use Cinegrain, and what I think about it overall. As with all my videos, I'll put the timestamps as well as all the links for everything I talk about in the description below. First up, here's a demonstration of how I use Cinegrain. Here's some footage I shot with my GH5. I shot this in V-Log in order to maximize the dynamic range. First, I denoise the footage. Next, I apply my color grade. The footage is looking great, but quite frankly, it's a little too clean for my liking. That's where the grain comes in, to bring life and character to the footage. Lastly, here are some cinematic bars. For some added effect, this footage looks great as a double exposure. The short answer, this is film grain. Basically, it's a uniform texture that you put over your footage to give it some unique and interesting characteristics. A lot of people describe it as cinematic, although I kind of hate to use that word, it's a little played out. I think cinematic is kind of the best word for discussing film grain, so I'm going to use it, sorry in advance. The long answer for what film grain is basically back in the day, everything was shot on film, and when things are shot on film, there's grain associated with it. I don't really know the science behind it, but basically all film had grain, and over time our eyes became accustomed to seeing grain in footage. Fast forward to today, all of our cameras are digital, and this results in a very, very clean picture with almost no grain, just some digital noise if it's too dark or the ISO is bumped up, but not actually grain. So in order to recreate that grainy old look that has been associated with film for so long, editors use artificial grain that they just kind of place over the footage to make it look as if it were shot on some of those older cameras, once again giving it that cinematic vibe. Let's say you have a bunch of completely separate footage, shot on different cameras at different days with different people, and you want to put all that footage together and make a sort of a movie with it. It's going to be virtually impossible to match that footage. But with a level of grain on top of it, you're going to get a uniform texture, which is going to trick your viewer's eye into thinking that the footage is actually a little more related. Another issue us editors have a lot is banding in the gradients. Oftentimes, when you have to compress your footage and upload it to YouTube or Vimeo or whatever, the compression actually makes the banding get a lot worse. So with a little bit of grain on top of that footage, you're actually going to add a layer of protection over the footage. So when the footage gets compressed, the banding is actually going to get hidden. Grain is also almost always used when it comes to special effects. In this example, I did this crazy double exposure video effect, which I kind of got from the True Detective intro, and I see a lot of wedding filmmakers doing it all the time. It's a pretty awesome effect, and basically, when you put a layer of grain over it, the effect looks so much better. Basically, anytime you're going to use two things that shouldn't be together from two separate clips or two separate cameras, putting a layer of grain over it is going to just hide it so well and just make everything blend together perfectly. Ultimately, I like to think of grain as the equivalent of mastering in music. Basically, it's the last step in the chain of editing, that final touch, that final polish, that just gives that last kind of character or vibe that you're going for, and just really ties the whole edit together. There are a ton of companies out there making grain. Some of them are Film Convert, Gorilla Grain, Red Giant, and a bunch of free ones all over the internet. Some I've tried, some I haven't. The difference between all these companies and what sets Cinegrain apart and why I ultimately chose Cinegrain is one key difference, and that's how the grain is implemented. With most grains I've come across, the grain is actually generated through an algorithm. Basically, you control the grain with a slider. This is really cool because the grain is super customizable and you can pretty much do whatever you want to it. You can make it bigger, smaller, you can enhance the reds, take away the greens, whatever you want. It's super customizable grain. But the downside to using grain like this is that it's still digital. The reason why I ultimately choose to use Cinegrain is because they take actual film scans and use that as their grain. So when you're using a Cinegrain grain, you're using real grain, something that was actually scanned in. And so while it's digital in a sense, it's also incredibly analog because it is real and it has this certain characteristic of life to it that the other digital grains don't have. And because Cinegrain allows you to work with the individual film scans, you basically have the freedom to do whatever you want with them. And they actually become super customizable if you know how to manipulate them. From everything I've read online, Cinegrain has basically become the Hollywood standard in terms of grain. And I will say, I've been seeing Cinegrain's grains all over the place. And it's pretty cool that I've gotten better at recognizing the different grains. This is it. This is Cinegrain in all of its glory. It's basically a 1 terabyte hard drive with the Cinegrain logo engraved on it. Nothing special. Basically, in order to buy it, you go to their website, pay them, and they have this shipped to you. They actually shipped it via the US Postal Service, which I was not a big fan of at all. It was packaged okay, but I just hate the USPS. And I think it would have been nice if they used like UPS or FedEx, but whatever, it came safely and it works, so no real complaints there.
When you first plug it in, this is what you see. A 2 terabyte hard drive filled with about 1 terabyte of grain scans. Upon opening the hard drive, you'll see the grains neatly organized with graphics next to them for a nice aesthetic. The 8, 16, and 35 millimeters are the main grains, along with a wide variety of specialty grains. Upon taking a closer look, we'll see that all the grains were scanned in 4K, are about 45 seconds long, and are about 7 gigabytes large. If we open up this one, for example, we'll see that it plays as a QuickTime movie, and the grain is basically just a gray screen with a bunch of moving dots. And as you continue to scroll through the library, you'll see a seemingly endless supply of grains to choose from. Using the grain is as simple as drag and dropping it over your footage. As it already is a video file with its own unique dimensions, we'll see that it doesn't completely fit over my footage, so we're going to apply a crop. Upon playing it back, we'll see that it's simply covering my footage, displaying exactly what I played earlier. In order to put this grain into effect, we simply change the blend mode from normal to overlay. From there, adjust the opacity to taste. I typically use anywhere from 20% to 80%. And because these grains are actual video files themselves, you can virtually do anything to them. For example, you can apply an opacity fade, you can change the scale to make the grain bigger and more pronounced, apply color corrections, and even add transitions directly to the grain layer. The possibilities are truly endless.
Ultimately, I like Cinegrain. I've been using it in a ton of my films, and at this point, I don't think I'd feel comfortable without it. However, I went through a ton of turmoil deciding whether or not I was going to buy this product. You know, it runs for around $1,000. I think I got it for like $800, which is like way more than I ever would have dreamed I would spend on a product like this. So I called up a friend who I know has Cinegrain, and I asked him, I was like, what do you think of this? Should I buy it? And the first thing that he said to me was overrated. And after using it, I definitely agree with his assessment. I mean, it's overrated, and when I say something's overrated, I don't mean that it's bad, I just think it's overrated. So it's still a really good product, it's just not quite as good as everyone makes it out to be. Ultimately, I think it's a luxury item. You know, like if you have extra money or you like really into grains and want to get that like indie vibe type of films, I would say get it and splurge. But you definitely do not need this product to make films with awesome grains. One recommendation I have is to check out Film Convert, which is what I used before I used Cinegrain. And basically for like $200, you get their entire color grading suite as well as their grains. And their grains look beautiful. They're used all over Vimeo and on a ton of productions lately as well. Ultimately, I'd say that I'm gonna continue to use Cinegrain a lot. And as much as I'm bashing the product right now, I really do love it. So it's a tough call. I mean, I would probably give it like a 5.5 out of 10, maybe like a 6. Good product, expensive, maybe a little overused, still pretty awesome. Take what you will from this. Get it, you won't be disappointed. Don't get it, there's many other options. That's the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to leave a comment, I pretty much respond to everything. If there's any videos you want to see me make, feel free to reach out and let me know. I highly recommend following me on Instagram, where I do a ton of behind the scenes and just show my day-to-day life. Peace. Light 1, light 2, light 3. That's the 3-point lighting system. So yeah, so I basically stand right here. I have this microphone right here, and then I'm kind of just like talking into the camera. I kind of like put these ladders in and like these like shovels, which I thought looked kind of cool.